Don't Depend on Daddy is an unfiltered safe space, empowering young professionals to build independence in their 20s and beyond, whether it be personal, professional, or financial. Regardless of your age, relationship status, or job title, the most consistent person in your life is you. So join me and let's build our independence together. Enjoy! Hello and welcome back to Don't Depend on Daddy, the podcast. My name is Michaela. I am your host, and I'm super excited for today's episode because we are going to be doing a deep dive on content creation. For whatever reason, over the last couple of weeks, I have received so many questions about content creation, and I thought it was time to really do a dedicated video that you can come back and reference at any point in time, where I give you all my best tips on how to get started with content creation, a little bit about my strategy, how to organize your content, reach your goals, all the things. I've been around the block, obviously, when it comes to content creation and how to use content not only to sell my own products, because that is one of the big engines of my business, but also to work with brands, which is the other main revenue strategy. And so when I'm thinking about my content overall, I definitely fall in a bit of a unique position because my content works for me in two different ways. Whereas a lot of creators who I love and, who are very successful really pick their path, right? They're either doing their own products and services or they're working with brands. And there's not a ton of creators who fall really in the middle of that Venn diagram as I would, visualize it. So I've worked with different management companies. I've worked with a content strategist. Obviously, I learn by doing, but I really have found and learned a lot of the skills related to social media through taking online courses, which I definitely recommend you do if you're interested in getting started on social media and learning, more of the tactics around social media management. One of my favorite resources to learn from is Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online learning platform where you can learn all different types of skills from real people who are industry experts. It has thousands of classes on different topics like animation and editing, photography, art, illustration, productivity, and so much more. I use Skillshare all the time at the beginning of my content journey because I used to work in finance, not social media. So I really didn't have any idea what I was doing. And I still use it all the time today because the social media industry and the landscape is so dynamic. I feel like there's so much to learn and everything is constantly changing. So if I want to keep my skills up to par, I need to be taking classes and really making sure that I'm learning in the direction the industry is moving in. My favorite course that I've taken so far is social media content creation in Canva. And this will teach you everything you need to know about using Canva. This is one of my most used social media tools, if not the most used social media tool over the last 6 years. Like I am in Canva every single day that I'm working. So really important to learn how to use the tools that exist. Another class that I loved was CapCut Basics. I use CapCut to edit all of my videos on Instagram and TikTok, which is a question that a lot of you actually asked me in the Q box. At the end of this episode, we will do a little Q&A, but everyone was asking how I edit my videos, and the answer is CapCut. So this course that I took on Skillshare was so helpful when I was just getting started with CapCut, but I definitely go back and reference it all the time as I'm learning new edits and really trying to up-level my editing skills for my videos. I definitely recommend checking out Skillshare because there really is something for everyone on there. The first 500 people to use my link in the description or scan the QR code will receive 1 month of a free trial. So if you're interested in checking out Skillshare, definitely check it out in the show notes. With all of this in mind, here is what we are going to cover today. First is my content strategy. So I'm going to touch on a little bit of what I'm currently doing, what I used to do, changes that I've made. Then I'm going to get into what I learned from working with a content strategist because I worked with someone back in June just to have some fresh eyes on my content and help me change my direction a little bit because I was feeling a bit stagnant. And then at the end, I will answer your questions from that Instagram Q box and share some more just generalized and tactical tips. If you enjoy this type of content where I'm talking more about content creation and business, etc., let me know because I do feel like this episode is really only going to scratch the surface, and obviously I'm happy to go deeper on anything or do more episodes like this if there is appetite for it. So leave a comment and let me know. And with that, let's just get right into it. So, we are going to kick things off here with my content strategy. And I'm going to share my strategy as an example because I find that examples are the best way to learn rather than talking just about like theories around social media. So, overarching, I post content across the board on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. I have this podcast, and then I also have a weekly newsletter. Again, a lot of these skills, particularly when it comes to my newsletter and email marketing, I also learned via courses on online platforms like Skillshare. So really recommend, like, I don't mean to keep going back to that, but I really recommend that you utilize those types of resources because you can learn a lot when it comes to scale. This year, though, I have really started to more seriously integrate YouTube into the mix beyond just YouTube Shorts. And my main goal over the next year-ish is for YouTube to become my main platform. I use all of these platforms to monetize in two key ways. First, through selling my digital products like the personal finance dashboard, and then second, to work with different types of brands in a sponsored capacity. And the way that those sponsorship works depends on, or like it varies, right? Like sometimes it's a pay for post, other times it could be some sort of integration, other times it could be like a speaking opportunity or a spokesperson opportunity. So it really just depends. When you're thinking about content platforms to start with, especially if your goals is to work with brands, I recommend one short form and one longer form platform. For short form, I really think that Instagram is better than TikTok, and I know that's probably not what you want to hear, but if you're thinking long term, like Instagram is definitely more reliable in terms of longevity compared to TikTok. That being said, though, sometimes the barrier to entry on TikTok feels a little bit lower, which I want to acknowledge. Like, I completely understand that. So for building confidence, like, I think maybe TikTok could be a good place to start. It really just depends on how you're feeling about the platforms. Like, I think, again, long-term Instagram should be the move. Like, if you're going to start on TikTok, you should plan to move over to Instagram or simultaneously build an Instagram audience. But, you know, if getting started is really what's blocking you, maybe TikTok is the more, I don't want to say better path, but just easier path. That being said, too, if you're feeling really good, you could also create content for both or just like cross post your content on both. But you definitely need to be present on at least Instagram or TikTok. Again, ideally both if you're able to. For a long form, this could be YouTube, it could be starting a podcast, it could be starting a weekly newsletter or a Substack. The goal is to have a place to elaborate on some of the key topics that you discuss on these short form platforms or vice versa, right? Like maybe you have a long form platform as your main content and then you make 2 to 3, short form pieces of content that tie back to that long form. How you go about this depends and is up to you. Like I start with short form and then I elaborate on long form, but I actually am working on moving to, again, making this long form sort of my main focus and then creating short form content around these topics in a little bit more of an optimized way. That could be a separate video. So if you are interested in that, thought process, please let me know because I don't have time to get into the details in this episode specifically. So to round this out, one short form and one long form is a great place to start. And eventually, like once you get into a rhythm, you can expand over time. And part of this just comes from learning about social media, learning about different strategies to be present in different places. The next layer of my content strategy are my content pillars. So content pillars are the main key topics and themes that you talk about on social media. I think having about 3 is the sweet spot. And I want to be very clear that content pillars don't have to be hyper specific. They can be broad themes. And the goal is to have direction behind what you're posting and create a sense of cohesiveness with your content. My content pillars for like break your budget are largely focused on personal finance, but I have also begun to integrate some more lifestyle and professional aspects. I would say I started with personal finance And then obviously, like, your income is tied to your job. So we started talking a little bit more about career as well. And then as I got into a good rhythm with those two pillars, I've slowly begun to integrate some more lifestyle forward aspects. So right now, these are my three content pillars. First is financial foundations and routines. So this is just generalized personal finance guidance and tips, budgeting tips, financial routines, economic updates, so like updates on what's going on in the world from a financial standpoint, or like, popular topics. This is newer for me, something I'm integrating in going forward. And then, savings tips, all that kind of stuff. My second pillar is underconsumption and buying less and buying better. This is where I'm focused more on decluttering, my general buying less, buying better theme, updating my wardrobe, everyday luxuries, things I'm buying in general, how I'm spending my money intentionally. So this is not to be confused with not shopping, but shopping more thoughtfully and really making sure that I'm getting use out of what I'm buying. So this pillar for me is both a finance and a lifestyle pillar because it allows me to integrate product into my content, which is really important for working with different types of brands beyond just personal finance topics. It also allows me to share more about my own thought processes and what's going on in my life. And it differentiates me from other finance creators because what I find with the online personal finance space is there's such a disdain for spending money and using your money for anything besides just doing like savings and free stuff, which I understand, especially if you're trying to course correct if you have a shopping problem, but it's not really A, sustainable, and B, it's just not how I live my life. So like, I'm not going to get on here and say, don't buy anything and then secretly go and buy and shop and do stuff. I want to share my thought process around it because I think the way that I approach shopping and consumption is pretty realistic, and it's a skill, right? It's a skill I'm working on, and it's a skill that I know a lot of you are too. So that's where that content pillar came to be, and I share the background and thought process there because if you're thinking of your own content pillars, I really encourage you to think about what are the themes in your life? Because if you have themes in your life, it's something you can likely translate into content. My third content pillar is career design for financial freedom. So this is where I'm thinking about becoming work optional and just my financial independence journey, and where I share more about how I think about future planning and building a career that I truly enjoy. So in the past, a lot of my career content was really focused on corporate careers because I was working a 9-to-5 job and like fresh out of the job market. That being said, it's now been 3.5 years since I've had a corporate job. And so it's not that I don't have tips and advice. Like I literally just did a resume review for someone. I feel like I have one foot in that window still, but I am a little bit separated from it. And so I don't want this pillar to be so corporate focused because it's not something that I am really all that involved in, right? So it's a little bit harder for me to create that type of content where when I take this perspective of career design for financial freedom, I'm able to talk about financial independence and like my FIRE journey, which is something that's very top of mind and important to me. But I'm also allowed to share more around like how I structure my workday, productivity tips, decisions I'm making when I'm thinking about the future of my business, this type of business and content creation style of content. So it's just a little bit more broad and it allows me to tie in some different themes. So as you can see with these three pillars, they all in some way tie back to my main theme, which is personal finance. But they're broad enough where I can talk about lifestyle decisions and professional decisions that I'm making because obviously those integrate into financial decisions and how I'm using my money. I see a lot of conflicting advice online around content pillars, but at the end of the day, if you don't have content pillars, you have no theme or direction with your content, right? And that's confusing not only to your audience, which is very important that you are nurturing that relationship, which again, that's a whole other video. If you're interested, let me know. Maybe I can do a series on all of this. But it will also make it really hard for you to come up with content ideas. And this is especially important too if you have a goal of monetizing both with your own products and services and with brands. Because when you think about it, someone isn't going to buy something from you if you're posting random stuff. Like you have to have a strategy to position yourself as an expert for someone to spend money on a product or a service that you create. And then on the other end of that with brands, like a brand isn't going to work with you if they have no idea what to expect when they go on your social media. Like brands are looking for a consistent posting schedule. They're looking for a cohesive style of video or, a couple different styles of video, but they're executed on in a consistent way. So you have to have consistency and you have to have themes. You don't have to have a super hyper specific niche, but you have to have themes. So yeah, that's my broader content strategy. Obviously, that's very high level. Again, if you're interested in more details or like the nitty gritty of organization and how I map out my content and authority content versus solution content, like please leave a comment and let me know what you want to know, because I'm happy to go deeper on this. I just don't know if that's content that, is appealing to you. So leave a comment and let me know. With that in mind, I also want to share a quick rundown of what my content strategy, I guess. I don't even know. My strategy has changed a little bit. I guess more my content posting schedule and why I'm changing. Because I think if you're getting started, my newer strategy, like what I've been focused on for the last 2 or so months and will be going forward, will be a little bit more helpful. So up until just about 2 months ago, I used to post on Instagram and TikTok every single day. And I still post on TikTok pretty much every single day because like barrier to entry on TikTok is much lower. And I did this for over 5 years. Like literally for 5 years, I posted every single day. And it was a slog. I was getting tired. I think this led to me feeling really burnt out. I do think that posting consistently and frequently is super important, especially at the beginning, because you have lots of ideas and you're experimenting with different types of content, right? But I found that over the long term, not only was this plan unsustainable, but it also resulted in me sharing and posting a lot of content that I wasn't like excited about or proud of. So, I would share content just because I felt like I had to get something up. It wouldn't perform very well. It was repetitive. And you guys noticed it, but I felt it. And it just made me feel not excited about content creation, which when something is your job and it requires creativity in this way, you have to find ways to keep it fresh so that your creativity doesn't burn out. It's very challenging. Again, I don't ever want to sound ungrateful, but I do think we need to have a little justice for content creators because it is hard to come up with new and fresh ideas, especially for someone like me who's like, I'm not an influencer in the traditional sense. I'm not getting invited to all of these different trips and different events and stuff that I can create content around that's fresh and spicy. Like I generally work like 9 to 5, okay? I'm just sitting at my desk, probably like most of you, thinking about different ways that I can bring a lot of the thoughts happening in my head to life in a helpful way. So when I was pushing myself to post every single day, I found that I was just losing steam and something had to give. So ultimately, I made a big change in the type of content that I'm producing and the frequency, which if you follow me on Instagram, you have probably noticed I'm posting a little bit less and I'm posting pretty differently. So first, I've reduced my posting schedule from 7 days a week to 4 to 5. This is so I can focus on my content going deeper because I don't necessarily want more followers. Like I think there's this myth that more followers is better. I don't want that. I'm happy at the size that I'm at. I don't want to have 1 million followers on Instagram because when you reach those levels, there's different types of pressure and I just don't want that. Like at the level I'm at right now, I'm super happy. The challenge that I face is I have a lot of followers, but my videos don't always get the reach that I'm looking for. This again could be a totally separate video too. I'm coming up with so many ideas as I go through this podcast episode, but my goal is to go deeper, not wider. So I want my posts to hit a little harder. I want the reach to be higher. But reach aside, I want there to be conversations happening in my comment section. I want you to share your thoughts and opinions on what I'm talking about. And my old content just wasn't really doing that. Somebody had given me feedback that was like, your content would hit a little bit harder if it was less of a monologue and more of a conversation. And I could not agree more. I think that was stated so beautifully because it was so true. And part of building community and building a space where people can learn not only from you, but also from each other means you need to go a little bit deeper and share. Like, I don't share everything about myself. I definitely share the most about myself on the podcast. But now what I'm starting to do on Instagram is just share more of my opinions and perspectives on things that are going on or popular topics. So generally speaking, I would say my content is becoming a little bit more well-researched. The topics are broader and more relevant to the news cycle and current events. And I'm giving things a little bit more of a critical eye and critical thought rather than regurgitating how to in strictly educational content. So like I mentioned, my goal is to open up conversation so that we can discuss a little bit more. So if you're watching my videos, please leave a comment because I'm reading my comments. I'm doing my best to reply. Like, I just want there to be more going on my videos so that, again, we can all learn from each other because, I'm only one person, right? I have one perspective, but there's thousands of you who have your unique perspectives too. And I want to hear them, and so do other people. So the other layer of this change too is the style of content. So I'm aiming to do more talking to camera videos rather than the vloggy style content I was creating before, because I'm facing a little bit of a challenge with vlog content, and this could be temporary. I might, change my opinion on it at a later point. First being that I think the voiceovers can feel a little bit impersonal and I want to go deeper. Like, there's something very different about talking to camera versus doing a voiceover. And I also think talking to camera is a little bit easier to create personally. Some people feel differently and love doing vlogs. But the second layer of this, and this is the most important to me, is it's really hard for me to capture enough content for vlogs consistently because I don't want to be filming all the time. I don't want to film my life every day. I don't want to film what I'm doing every day. I don't want to constantly be looking at myself in that way. I've found it to be very not great for my mental health. I don't want to be on the camera all the time, and I want to have an element of privacy in my life. And not privacy as in like I have anything to hide, but more just like not everybody needs to know what I'm doing every single day, right? Like, my routines look pretty similar on a day-to-day basis. I'm not doing tons of exciting stuff all the time, and I just find the vlog content to be not only repetitive for the viewer, but also really cumbersome and clunky for me to go about my own life because I'm thinking about filming stuff. So in general, and that's not to say I'm not going to be doing any sort of vlog videos ever again. Like, I post one pretty much every single week. It's just going to be less, like 1 week instead of 3 to 4 of those style of videos a week. In my mind, it's more sustainable for me to pivot my content strategy more towards the talking to camera videos because I can film them anytime, I can film them anywhere, I can do such a wide variety of topics. I've been loving doing more green screen style of videos. I think that's a great way to share opinion, perspective, and teach, but also with a visual element to it. So that's really the direction I'm going to be moving in. And then beyond this, I have over the course of this year really started to integrate a lot more carousels into my content. I love a carousel. I think a carousel tells a different kind of story, but also allows you to consume content in a little bit of a different way. So from a creation standpoint, I love it. From a consuming standpoint, like, I love consuming carousels. And if you've noticed, like, my page has a lot more carousels. And it's funny because my carousels always perform better than my videos these days. They just get higher reach. I don't know if that's because I'm just so talented at creating carousels. But anyways, I create my carousels in Canva, learned how to use Canva via Skillshare. So, food for thought. If you're looking to learn how to make content in this way, I really recommend taking a course to learn the skill. It'll save you a lot of time. So with all of this in mind, and then we'll move on to the next section because I know this was kind of long. I'm also aiming to incorporate more lifestyle elements into my finance content and show you how I'm making decisions and what I'm loving or using, because this allows me to continue to stay creative, but also opens up doors, like I mentioned, to work with different types of brands rather than just strictly finance brands and banks, which, again, when you're working or thinking about working with brands, there's a bajillion brands that exist out there. But when you have a niche, sometimes it can limit you to the brands that want to work together. So like I do a lot of personal finance sponsorships, and that's all great and fine, but I would love to do more lifestyle forward sponsorships around, and with brands and stuff that I use and love and that makes sense for my brand. I really want to be doing more lifestyle forward. I think it's way more fun. It allows me to be more creative, and it doesn't cannibalize my own products, which I think is very important. So anyways, all this to say, if you're at the beginning of your content journey, I do think that posting consistently is important, but I also think that posting high quality content that is thoughtful and well done is important too. So if you get into the mindset of like, I just have to get something up every day, you will feel burnout a lot faster. And I'm all about long-term sustainability, longevity, building a brand and a business that has legs to stand on. And so don't rush the process. I know we see a lot of overnight success stories from one viral TikTok. I almost think that the virality complicates things because it pushes you to rush something that, really shouldn't be rushed. Social media has created this illusion that you can build a super, profitable business really quickly. It's an illusion. It's not real. And a lot of what you see there isn't real. That's not to say it needs to take years and years, but it's not going to happen in a week. Okay. So with that, let's move on to this next section, which is my experience working with a content strategist. Back in June, I worked with a strategist to take a closer look at my content and help reshape my approach to my content, which you may have noticed. And this is really where the idea of going deeper, not wider, came into play. And she was the catalyst behind a lot of the changes I've made. It was super helpful. I worked with Alyssa from Inspired Media Co. We did a VIP week, really great follow, just in general, if you are someone who is getting started with content, particularly lifestyle content. I really enjoyed this because with the VIP week, we had time to review my content and put together a strategy, but then also we had time to actually implement that strategy over a week so she could provide some more real-time feedback on small tweaks or little changes that I could make. So I'm going to just give you a summary of what I learned from her because I found it to be very, very helpful. And obviously, if you were to work with her, you may have different learnings or different focus areas, especially if you're a little bit earlier in your journey. But also if you're listening to this and you're a more seasoned content creator or you've been creating for a couple of months and you have a good rhythm, do not underestimate the value of investing in a little bit of help. I think her prices are pretty reasonable, to be completely honest, and I would have paid more. But really don't underestimate how helpful having not only a fresh set of eyes, but also a set of eyes that's professionally trained on your content. Because the way that she looked at my content and approached my content was so different than how I was looking at it. And it was so helpful to get that other perspective and then use a lot of those learnings now going forward. So first is we focused on we-centered content because my goal was to bring my audience a little bit more into the circle, right? A lot of my content was a monologue as opposed to opening up conversation. This has been a big struggle of mine because I just share what I do and I find that to be easier, but content doesn't necessarily and shouldn't always be easy. Really what I want my content to be is the conversation starter because I want to hear from you. So we focused on small tweaks to really build community and start these conversations within my content. And ever since, I have noticed a pretty big shift, not only in the volume of comments that I'm getting, but also the quality of comments I'm getting across socials. I noticed this a lot on TikTok, but also really too on Instagram. And it feels really good to see that progress. Second is we focused on both authority and solution content. So in order to position myself as an expert and continue to provide educational tips and guidance, which I want to do, I needed to focus more on authority content to present and share, common problems and questions that I get, but also solution content that shows practically how you can solve these problems through steps, examples, and again, what I'm doing. That's how I bring in my own unique perspective. This has been such a shift for me. in the way that I think about my content topics. I've started to do a lot more like personal finance reading. I'm reading the news and keeping up with what's going on, which I wasn't doing before. And this has helped me bring in new topics and just share things from a little bit of a different perspective. I also think it's nice when I'm thinking about the content I'm consuming. I like to hear how people break down, for example, like an article with their own thoughts and opinions as part of that. Like, I think it's interesting to hear how other people are thinking about, I don't even want to say issues, but just generalized topics, because I almost feel like we've gotten into a groupthink sort of mindset when it comes to really anything. And I want to know what other people are thinking. And I want to create a space where we can have those kinds of conversations. And then number 3, the last thing that I learned here, or like the last big thing, is we really did hone in on some lifestyle stuff. So I've dabbled in lifestyle content, and I have a lifestyle page that I know desperately needs my attention. I have not had the brain space for it. And I'm more focused on making sure my content with Break Your Budget is dialed in. But I want to bring some of those lifestyle elements as part of just like a bigger pillar of Break Your Budget, so you can get to know me, which I feel like, again, I do a lot on the podcast, but we've really brought this into my Instagram story content, which I think is the best place to build stronger relationships, because the people who are watching your stories are generally the people who are most bought into who you are. And I've been sharing more around my routines and answering your questions and my outfits and just being more consistent over there. I'm loving this angle, and I feel like it adds a freshness to my content that I wasn't really feeling before. So when I think about like my posting schedule, if I'm posting 4 to 5 days a week, on those days where I'm not posting in-feed content on Instagram, I'm very heavily present on my stories and vice versa. So I'm just trying to make sure I'm showing up on socials on the daily in a way that feels consistent, but also achievable for me. So overall, if you've been making content for a little while and you're not seeing the results you're looking for, I do recommend working with a strategist. I love Tess Barkley for this too. I haven't worked with her like in a paid capacity, but I really do enjoy listening to her podcast. It's called Busy Blooming. I think she has great tips. And then, of course, you can take classes on Skillshare or online learning platforms too. So moving into this Q&A portion, I am going to answer your questions, but also share some more like practical content tips in general. I asked you over on Instagram to submit the questions you have. So if you ever want to have your question answered on the podcast, you need to be clued into my Instagram stories, because that's where I pull the questions from. So the first question here is how to organize content creation while working a 9 to 5. This was one of my more popular ones. I think that balancing creating content with a 9 to 5, it obviously requires effort, right? I do think there's this myth that creating content is super easy and takes 2 seconds. And in some cases, for some unique scenarios, yeah, sure. But for most people, content requires a lot of effort. It may look effortless, but it's not, okay? It's by no means, though, impossible to balance creating content with a 9 to 5. That's how I built Break Your Budget. I did that for like 2 or 3 years. The key, though, is planning in advance. And I do this even though I don't have a 9 to 5, because planning gives you a schedule and it helps you clearly know like exactly what you need to film and create over a defined period of time. So do not underestimate the value of having like a content plan. I would take maybe like 1 hour every week, or every other week, depending on how frequently you're posting, and map out what you want to post following your own content pillars. And then once you have those posts defined, you can identify what you need to capture. So like if it's a day in the life, obviously you need to pick a day where you're going to film that. Or if it's a what I ate this week, it's like, okay, I need to make sure Monday through Friday I'm filming my meals. Like you have to figure out how this video is going to come to life visually, or if it's a carousel, like what photos you need to capture and when you're going to capture those, because that gives you, again, when you wake up, you have a plan of like, okay, I'm going to work, but also throughout the day, like I need to capture X, Y, Z. Then with that, you can dedicate time, either weekly or small bits of time each day, to edit and post and schedule, depending on what your schedule and your posting schedule looks like. I have found that planning out my posts a week in advance helps so much with overwhelm because I know what I need to film and it takes all the guesswork out of it. And usually the reason why people struggle with content creation in a 9 to 5 is because there's so much guessing and there isn't really any planning. It's like, okay, I'm going to work today. And then also I want to post on Instagram. Like, what do I want to post? And you don't have the brain space when you're working a 9 to 5 to like think about what am I going to post today. You have to already know what you're going to post. So you have to take separate time over the weekend or outside of your job to actually plan this out. When I was working my 9 to 5, I worked on Saturdays or Sundays. Like I picked one day of the weekend, and I talked about this all the time, where I would go sit at a coffee shop for like 6 hours. I would get a coffee, I would get lunch, depending on what time it was, and I would map out and plan and create all of my content the best I could for the following week or two. So it requires effort and it requires time outside of your job where you have dedicated brain space to think about it. So a day over the weekend is great, or you could split it a couple hours during the week depending on what your schedule is. The next question here is, how long does it take to create content and edit? And the answer to this isn't so cut and dry because it really depends on what type of content you're making. For short form content, I would say for me, I probably spend about 1 to 1.5 days per week ideating, scripting, filming, and editing a week's worth of short form content for Instagram that I'm reposting over to TikTok. For podcasts, I do my best to bulk create podcasts. So like 1 to 2 days per week, but every other week. So like I, over the course of yesterday and today, am recording 4 podcast episodes. And in those 2 days, I'll, record the episodes and edit them and schedule them. But I probably spend another day too scripting everything out. That was a question I got too, is like, do I script out my podcasts because they sound largely pretty cohesive? Yes. Scripting out your podcast makes your podcast episodes so much better. I don't, script them word for word verbatim. Sometimes I do. Like for this one, I have a pretty detailed script, but I make sure I have a plan because otherwise, like, you could just talk into nothing. Like talking on a mic alone is hard, and it's hard to do it and actually get to the point and not say lots of ums. And so a script really does help with that. So for podcasts, that's sort of my process. For YouTube, I would say between, ideating, scripting, filming, editing, for one video, that's about a day and a half. It takes time to do dedicated YouTube videos. Podcasts are easier because they're much lower edit. So it's sort of like I do a one take, and because I have a script, I don't have to spend a lot of time going back and editing and cutting things out. Whereas for YouTube, like it's a little bit of a different process. So it really depends, and it depends on how many edits you do, how efficient you are. I specifically choose to keep my longer form content like my podcast and my YouTube's low edit so that I can get content out on a reasonable schedule. Like I don't want to train the viewer to expect a super edited, highly curated video from me every week because that's not reasonable for me to create. It takes a lot of time. I also don't think that highly edited videos are necessary. I think the content matters a lot more than the edits personally. But like a vlog, YouTube, for example, like edits matter, but I don't really do those. So it's not something I spend a lot of time on. If you're posting on Instagram a couple times a week and you want to be strategic about it, I'd say you need like 10 hours total. So it's a part-time job, but it could be more than that depending on type of videos you're posting, frequency you're posting, which places you're posting, if you're going to add in a longer form style of content. So, but 10 hours I think is a good gauge to like mentally prepare for. Do you plan your posts in advance or do you schedule them? So as I talked about earlier, I plan out like a week or so in advance. I like to, at the top of the month, I have a video on this, map out like general content ideas. And then every week I go back and sort of refine those or change them based on what's going on. But generally speaking, if I have like a week's worth of content planned out, like I'll plan it out, let's say the Wednesday before, then Thursday and Friday, I'll work on creating that content for the following week. And then that way I don't have to wake up on Monday and be like, what am I going to be posting this week? Because it's just not productive and it's not a strategy to stay consistent. What I don't do is I don't use any schedulers or anything. Like if you see a post from me, I'm posting that and I'm posting it in real time. I don't schedule my content in that manner, but I do plan it out in advance. I break things up into content days. So like, for example, with short form content, I'll take a day to record what I need, usually in the morning. Then in the afternoon, I'll do those edits. Like it will take me that day and a half where I'm only doing short form content. And then I'll have another day where I'm only doing podcasts, and I'll have another day where I'm only doing YouTube. And that just makes it a lot easier for me to get in the zone and like not batch create, but I do batch create in a way, but more just get things done without switching between all different platforms. What apps do I use to create content? This is the last question. I film all of my short form content on my iPhone and I edit in CapCut, like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. I use Canva for all of my graphics, and I use the content calendar in Canva to organize and like just throw those like graphics on a schedule that I can visually see. I also use Notion as my business hub and as my main source for just like daily to-do lists and content planning and mapping out scripts and all that kind of stuff. I do owe you a Notion tour. I've been asked for that a few times. It's on my list. What I want to do though before I do a Notion tour is like create the template so that it's available, because I know if I post that video, like people are going to ask for it. So I want to make sure I have that all set and ready to go before I actually create like a Notion tour video, but it's coming. You will get it in the next, couple of months probably. For podcast editing and YouTube editing, I use Adobe Premiere Pro. And I think that, I've never actually used CapCut for long form editing. I know some people do, but I like Adobe. I learned a little bit about how to do that too on Skillshare, but a lot of it was also just like figuring it out in there. I don't use all the features, to be honest, but I do use Adobe for that. And then I use Poppy AI and ChatGPT as my tools to help me with ideation or like sussing out brainstorming ideas and whatnot. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode. If you enjoyed it, again, please let me know, because I would love and could probably make tons of content about all of this. I had so many ideas come up just as I was creating this episode, and I want to help you. I don't post a lot of content creation content because people ask for it, but I feel like it never really performs all that well. So if you enjoyed this, let me know. Let me know what you want to learn. With that, I will catch you next week. Thanks so much for listening, and bye. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to leave me a review. Make sure to follow me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. And if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you next week.